Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. 2 years, 8 months and 28 nights. Such is the title of the novel of our guest. It's his 12th novel. He's known around the world as a writer, of course, but also as a man against whom a fatwa was addicted back in February 1989 for another book he wrote, The Satanic Verses. Salman Rushdie, thank you very much for being on the show today.
Thank you.
Obviously, you've had a special life. Your last book was a memoir, Joseph Anton, where you recounted those years in hiding, in fear, and eventually getting back as having a normal life. It seems that in this new novel, you wanted to have fun.
Well, I wanted to do something very different to the previous book. I just felt the need to go back into, in some way, restate my love of fiction,
and science fiction in this,
including science fiction, comic books, space opera, all of that, and connect in a way a Western tradition of the fantastic with some of these ancient stories of the East that had been, in a way, that were the things that made me fall in love with literature in the first place, the so-called wonder tales. Of which The 1001 Nights is the most famous example, but there are many other such collections as well.
Right. The 1001 Nights, which is the inspiration and the reason why it's 2 years, 8 months, and 28 nights, is not a text about religion. And in your book, the dominating figures are the jinns, which basically live by their own rules.
Yes, they're kind of anarchic beings. And I mean, the interesting thing about the jinn is that although some people think that they belong to the Islamic tradition, they actually, in a way, they've escaped the Islamic tradition and they belong to everybody. The idea of these anarchic creatures being amongst us, I thought was interesting. And then to use that as a metaphor of the larger anarchy that spreads in the world now was also attractive. So some of the jinn are, some of the jinn are good. Some of them are helpful to us. And some of them are evil, and all of them, in some way, are mischievous.
Right. In this book, it's there's a lot of fantasy, but there are lots of messages, and there is a clash, if you will, that goes back centuries between the man who's known as Averroes in the West, Ibn Rushd, who inspired your father
to change our name.
Change your name, and a theologian from Iran, Ghazali, and it's basically, in a nutshell, a fight between reason and religion. So there's a clear message also in this book.
Or it's actually a fight between progressive and repressive forms of religion. Because Ibn Rushd certainly saw himself as a religious philosopher. It's just that he was a progressive thinker, whereas Ghazali was a much more conservative one. Interestingly and sadly, I mean, Averroes has been incredibly important in the history of Western thought, not so much in the history of Eastern thought, where the more conservative thinking of Ghazali has been more influential.
Right. I mean, there are lots of quotes. You quote Ghazali as saying at some point, "Only fear will move sinful men towards God."
Yeah.
Obviously, if you read this today, you would think that it's, Mahmoud al-Baghdadi talking to his ISIS followers.
Well, it sort of is, except there's a strange fact, which is that at the time that I wrote this book, I'd never heard of al-Baghdadi or ISIS, and nor would you have, because in a strange way, I invented this clash as a fictitious clash, and then had the strange experience of watching it happen in real life. So it's the opposite way around. And I'm really sorry that this book ended up coming true, but it did.
But it's also coming from your own story, your own perception, your own calls, your warning.
Well, my view about religion is quite negative, in general.
To put it mildly.
Yeah, I mean, and not just Islam. My view of religion in general is that it's a thing that I think the human race needs to grow out of. I mean, there's one character in the novel who suggests that religion, in a way, the gods are, you could see the gods as the parents of human beings, but once you get to be grown up, you don't want to live with your parents anymore.
Right. I mean, at some point, I won't tell the book, but in the end, you say fear was overcome with its defeat. Men and women were able to set God aside as children would put their childhood
exactly.
toys
I think
aside.
it's time to stop living with our parents.
But that's not happening.
It's not happening, but I'm recommending that it does. There's something a little unhealthy about grown-up people who go on living with their mother and father. And I think that the idea of God is, we know where it comes from. It comes from a desire to explain our origins, and it comes from a desire to organize moral principles. And those are not bad things to want to do. But I just think that that way of doing it has gone badly wrong.
Right. That's why many people are saying, well, we're all today Salman Rushdies in a way. Obviously, not having gone through what you're living, but in terms of the threats, in one of your interviews, you compared this to the Hitchcock movie, The Birds. There's one bird landing, no one cares, and then they all arrive.
And it's true that I felt about what happened to the Satanic Verses as being like one of the first episodes in what afterwards became a much larger narrative. When it was the first bird and later the sky was full of birds. So yeah, I think that. But this book is a kind of, yes, it's about what's happening in the world, because I feel with all my books that I want to look at what's happening in the world.
And any reader will see this in your books in a way.
Yes, and that's good. I want them to see it. But I also want them to see the reason the book is not a naturalistic portrait of what's happening in the Middle East is that I wanted to try and reach for something a little more universalist than just to write an allegory of the news. I wanted to say that this quarrel, the quarrel between the rational and the irrational, it's not new. Right. It's been happening for as long as we've been around. And also, it's not only an external battle, it's also an internal battle.
But it's an internal battle in Islam, clearly.
Yeah, but it's an internal battle in human beings. Right. I think we all have an irrational side to us, which sometimes quarrels with the rational side of us. So I wanted to say it's about all of this. Yes, it's about what's happening in the world, but then we have to look at it in a broader perspective as well.
In this controversy that we see around Islam, about naming Islamist terrorism or not, that you're having in the US, in the UK, in France, do you think people are more afraid to name names because of what could happen to them?
No, I think they're more afraid to name it for fear of there being repercussions against innocent people. So the desire not to make all Muslims guilty of Islamic terrorism means that people don't like to say Islamic terrorism. But unfortunately, it is Islamic terrorism. And that's to say, if everybody who carries out these acts say that they do it in the name of Islam, it's really quite unreasonable to say that that's not Muslim. It's obviously a kind of Islam that many Muslims would reject.
Is it only unreasonable or is it on purpose?
Well, it's on purpose and unreasonable. That's to say, when President Obama is reluctant to use the phrase Islamic terrorism, I think he's playing into the hands of the right wing by doing that. Because, but I think also in the Muslim world, it's very important that Muslims name it properly, that they see that this is, and I think increasingly intellectuals around the Muslim world are beginning to do that.
You're confident that there will be more?
I'm not confident of anything. I'm just saying there are signs of it. But I think you have, if you have a cancer in your system, you can't get rid of it until you first acknowledge that it's inside your body. And this is a kind of cancer in Islam.
Right.
And it needs to be acknowledged as being inside Islam and not separate from it.
Right. You are a staunch defender of free speech, or in kind of US style, but also a secular French style, I would say. And obviously there are controversies all the time, both in the US and also in the UK and in France. This summer, we've seen a controversy around the so-called burkini. And, but some people here in France saying it's too much. This is not about defending secularism, about defending women. It's attacking Muslims.
Yeah. Well, look, I haven't been here, so I don't know the day-to-day thing. In general, I dislike the burkini intensely. I dislike the burqa, the hijab, the niqab, and the burkini. And I mean, I come from a family of very large numbers of Muslim women. If you had tried to persuade my grandmother or my mother or my sisters or my aunts to wear any of these garments, they would probably have hit you. I come from a tradition in which it is completely rejected that women should be treated like this. But I also think, I don't think it's a thing for the police to do. There's something bizarre and dislikable about having policemen on a beach telling women to take their clothes off. And I thought it was right that the French higher court overturned those regulations. But I mean, I despise the burkini. I think it's a sign of male dominance over women. Because some of the people who tried to speak on its behalf said that by banning it, it was preventing Muslim women from going to the beach. Well, the only reason it's preventing Muslim women from going to the beach is that Muslim men won't let them do it if they don't wear the burkini. So it's about male oppression. And I think but it's a social issue. I don't think it should be for the law and the police.
Right. Several years ago, Samuel Huntington famously wrote a book called The Clash of Civilizations. He was roundly criticized, sometimes mocked for exaggerating things. Now some people go back to this and saying, well,
I have problems with the Huntington thesis because it seems to me to oversimplify. It suggests that there is a thing called Islam and a thing called the West, and that they are in conflict with each other. And we can see the most commonplace look at the Muslim world shows that the great battles happening now is happening inside the Muslim world. It's the Sunni Shia problem. Many, many more Muslims are being killed by other Muslims than are being killed by any Western drones. But the thesis itself it's oversimplifying to the point where it obscures the truth. The truth is that there's an enormous battle happening inside the Muslim world. And in a way...
Are you confident the progressive will prevail?
No. I mean, I would like to believe it, but it is not necessary for good to triumph over evil. It doesn't always happen.
Salman Rushdie, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for watching this edition of The Interview here on France 24. Stay tuned.